The world didn't end in fire or war. It ended in fabric. It started as a quiet conquest, slipping through the cracks of human civilization like a whisper that soon became a roar. One day, humanity was strutting through the neon-lit streets of Tokyo, the runways of Milan, and the ad-saturated hologram avenues of New York, wrapped in their finest silk, nano-weave, and smart textiles. The next, the Vh'ori arrived, and everything changed. Their ships did not descend in streaks of flame, nor shatter the sky with weapons. They came in beauty, in elegance, in flawless aesthetic precision. Cities awoke to the sight of shimmering, structures woven from metallic threads that bent light in impossible ways. Entire industries collapsed overnight, swept aside by the sheer gravitational pull of their perfection. Selene Vega watched it all unfold from behind the towering glass walls of her penthouse studio. For as long as she had lived, the world of fashion had been a game of creation and destruction. Trends that burned bright and died in days. Names that rose to godhood before being forgotten. It was a battlefield where only the bold survived. But this was something else entirely. She ran her fingers over the holographic headlines flickering in the air. Vh'ori declare Earth's aesthetic standards obsolete. Universal fashion code to be implemented within 30 solar days. Human. Designers struggle to comply with alien directives. A soft hum filled the room as her AI assistant Dante materialized beside her. A ghost of blue light and endless algorithms. The Vh'ori do not intend to negotiate, Dante murmured, his voice smooth as fine-cut velvet. They have already begun erasing designs deemed unworthy. Selene swiped through images, entire clothing lines reduced to nothing by alien nanite threads. The Paris Fashion Consortium had fallen overnight, their archives scrubbed. Haute couture, houses once invincible, were now bowing to alien diktats. Her jaw tightened. It wasn't just clothing. It was identity, expression, rebellion. If the Vh'ori succeeded, humanity would become nothing more than mannequins in a cosmic department store. She turned, pacing across the room, past racks of unfinished designs, holograms of fabrics shimmering, in the air like ghosts of what could be. "We should leave," Dante suggested. "Mars colonies are not yet under Vh'ori control. The exomarkets are—" "No," Selene's voice was steel. "Running is what they expect. Surrendering is what they demand." She paused, exhaling slowly. "But if fashion is the battlefield they've chosen, then it's one we can win." The world adapted quickly. It always did. Government. Leaders scrambled to interpret the Vh'ori mandates, sending frantic envoys to negotiate with the high curators. Ethereal beings wrapped in liquid silk, their forms shifting, as if sculpted by the very concept of elegance. The new laws were simple. Geometry was law. Symmetry was purity. Complexity was defiance. The results were immediate. Mass-market brands dissolved overnight, unable to conform to alien standards. Wardrobes were dictated by precision algorithms, eliminating chaotic elements such as asymmetry, layering, and color contrast deemed offensive to the universal aesthetic. Even the streets changed. Gone were the eclectic styles of the modern world, the punk revivals, the streetwear rebellions, the handcrafted fusions of culture and time. In their place were sterile, mathematically perfect uniforms, dictated by Vh'ori decree. It was an invasion, not of ships and weapons, but of thought, expression, and self. Selene's defiance did not go unnoticed. The first time she rebelled, it was quiet. A single dress, unveiled at an underground showing, its form deliberately chaotic, layers of asymmetry, colors clashing in perfect imperfection. It was the opposite of Vh'ori law. It was beautiful. The second time, it was war. She stood in the heart of a ruined Paris, where once stood the fashion capital of the world, now stripped bare of its soul. The Vh'ori had erased entire collections, purging them from digital existence as if they had never been created. But Selene had not come to bow. She had come to remind them of what humanity was. The moment she stepped onto the cracked marble runway, the air crackled with tension. The Vh'ori emissary stood at the far end, its form shifting, watching. The human spectators held their breath. Then the lights ignited, and Selene's models stepped forward. The Vh'ori shuddered. The designs broke them. Patterns clashed. Asymmetry twisted their reality. The sheer chaotic energy of human fashion overwhelmed their rigid perceptions, their perfect, unchanging forms, unable to process the very concept of evolution, of imperfection, of art that lived and breathed. The Vh'ori emissary staggered back, the liquid silk of its form trembling. Selene smirked. They had underestimated humanity. Fashion was not just aesthetic, it was a weapon. And humanity had just declared war. The Vh'ori did not take the rebellion lightly. Word spread like wildfire through the underground fashion circuits. Selene Vega had defied the invaders in a way no politician, no military strategist, no diplomat had. She hadn't fought with weapons. She hadn't pleaded for mercy. She had walked onto a runway and broken them. But the retaliation was swift. Within 24 hours, the Paris fashion resistance was wiped from the digital grid. Every hollow recording of Selene's Defiance show was scrubbed clean. Every encrypted channel she had used to broadcast burned from existence. The Vh'ori had erased her rebellion as if it had never happened. But something was different this time. For the first time since their arrival, the Vh'ori issued a direct summons. Selene was to meet with the High Curator of the Vh'ori Aesthetic Council. The meeting was set in the heart of New Milan, the once thriving epicenter of haute couture, now transformed into a monolithic temple of alien perfection. The city was no longer recognizable. Its organic, centuries-old streets had been wiped clean, replaced by impossible, symmetrical structures of shifting iridescent metal, as if the city had been woven into existence by an unseen cosmic hand. At the center of it all stood the Vh'ori Pavilion, an architectural impossibility, a building that seemed to rearrange itself as one looked at it, a structure of flowing silk and liquid metal that never seemed to hold a single shape for long. Selene walked through the towering entrance, her pulse steady, but her mind razor-sharp. She had dressed for war, a black asymmetrical coat, defiant in its rejection of the Vh'ori balance laws, threads of iridescent nanofiber stitched into deliberate chaotic patterns, a skirt that defied geometry, its jagged hemline an act of aggression in a world of alien perfection. Behind her, Dante flickered into existence, his holographic form glitching, slightly against the Vh'ori environment. "They are already watching you," he whispered. Selene smirked. "Good." The High Curator awaited her in the pavilion's core, a cavernous space that shimmered like the inside of a pearl, its walls shifting in waves of color so hypnotic that a lesser mind might have drowned in their depth. And at the center stood the Vh'ori Curator, a being of pure, liquid elegance. It did not have a face, nor did it need one. It was wrapped in a shifting tapestry of fabrics that flowed like a living ocean, its form neither male nor female, neither solid nor fluid. When it spoke, its voice was a whisper of silk against skin, a language of movement rather than sound. "You have disrupted the balance." Selene's lips curled. "You invaded my world and expect me to bow. Fashion is not balance. Fashion is evolution." A ripple passed through the High Curator's form. The surrounding Vh'ori shifted uncomfortably, their woven forms reacting to the sheer chaos of Selene's presence. "You misunderstand," the Curator murmured. "We do not destroy, we refine. Your world is disordered. You lack aesthetic clarity. Your species flails in anarchy, unaware of the damage you inflict upon the universal equilibrium." Selene crossed her arms. So your solution is to erase everything unique about us, to elevate you, to control us. The curator's shimmering fabric tightened. The air in the room became denser, pressing against her like an unseen weight. Your kind does not yet comprehend the weight of your flaws, the curator said. You believe chaos is strength. You do not understand that true power lies in mastery, in precision, in order. Selene stepped forward, eyes blazing. And yet, despite all your power, despite all your so-called mastery, my designs shattered your minds. Silence. The Vh'ori surrounding them shuddered, as if struggling to hold their forms together. The High Curator's flowing silk tensed, its shimmering hues momentarily flickering out of sync. Selene pressed on. You thought we were just another primitive species waiting to be corrected, but you weren't ready for what we are. Humanity is not something you refine. We don't fit into neat little patterns. We change, we reinvent. We turn destruction into art and make rebellion into beauty. She leaned in, her voice a whisper. And that terrifies you. A sharp pulse rippled through the chamber like a silent shockwave. The Vh'ori lurched, their very forms momentarily destabilized. The High Curator regained its composure, but the tension in the room had shifted. Selene had planted the seed. For the first time, the Vh'ori were experiencing something they had never encountered before, a force of creativity they could not predict. The meeting ended without resolution. The Vh'ori did not imprison her, nor did they silence her. That would have been too simple. Instead, they issued a challenge. If you truly believe in the strength of your chaos, then prove it. A single contest, one chance to demonstrate whether your species is worthy of retaining its aesthetic autonomy. Selene's pulse thrummed. She knew a trap when she saw one. But she also knew something else. They were scared. They had seen something in her designs they did not understand. Something they could not control. And that meant there was a way to win. She turned on her heel, marching out of the pavilion with fire in her veins. The moment she was outside, Dante's holographic form reappeared beside her. This is a dangerous path, he murmured. You realize what they're doing. Selene exhaled, staring at the city they had stolen, now trapped in the prison of their so-called perfection. They're giving me a stage, she whispered, and I'm going to burn it to the ground. The world watched as the challenge was set. The Vh'ori had never done this before. Every civilization they had encountered had simply submitted to their aesthetic superiority, bowing before their perfect symmetry, their unwavering balance. But humanity had fought back. With color, asymmetry, and raw, untamed invention. And now, a contest had been declared. A battle of design. A war of fabric and form. A single event that would determine whether humanity's creativity would be permitted to exist, or if it would be erased, refined into oblivion. Selene did not have time to celebrate. The moment she returned to her underground studio, hidden deep beneath the ruins of a shuttered Milanese fashion house, she found the war had already begun. Dante flickered into existence beside her, his holographic form glitching with distress. They are moving faster than expected. The Vh'ori have eliminated the remaining human fashion houses. Every design archive, every AI-generated prototype, wiped. Selene's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a contest. It was extermination. She turned toward the massive, high-resolution holo display in the center of the room. A map of the world's remaining fashion capitals flickered with red X's. Paris, gone. Tokyo, silenced. London, erased. A single name remained, blinking like the last heartbeat of a dying world. New York. They're leaving nothing to chance, Dante continued, his tone tight. The last human design houses are under siege. Marco Lisandro, Selene's breath hitched. Marco, the former king of the fashion world, a man who had ruled the industry with an iron grip, now a collaborator, bending the knee to the Vh'ori in exchange for power. They've made him their human liaison, Dante said. He's overseeing the execution of their final purge. Selene clenched her fists. The Vh'ori had learned. They weren't just erasing past designs. They were making sure that no new ones could ever be created, which meant if she was going to win this war, she would have to fight Marco first. The city had become a war zone. What was once the beating heart of human style and culture was now under Vh'ori occupation, transformed into a prison of uniformity. Massive holoscreens projected the universal aesthetic standards, reinforcing the new rules, the elimination of chaos, the suppression of individuality. And in the center of it all, the last human-run fashion house stood under siege. Selene moved, like a shadow through the ruined streets, her coat flickering between midnight black and glitched-out neon, a hacked fabric that disrupted the Vh'ori senses. Dante remained at her side, running calculations, mapping enemy patrols. The resistance inside the fashion house was failing. The Vh'ori's enforcers, faceless beings wrapped in perfect white geometric uniforms, moved with synchronized precision, erasing every design they touched. Selene entered through a hidden passageway beneath the building. The moment she emerged into the studio, she found Marco waiting for her. He hadn't changed. Draped in a Vh'ori-crafted ensemble, he looked flawless, a human mimicry of alien perfection. His once expressive eyes were now hollow, his movements calculated, precise. "You should have joined me when you had the chance," he said, voice smooth as glass. Selene's jaw tightened. "You're nothing but their puppet." Marco sighed. "You still don't understand. This isn't just about fashion. This is survival. The Vh'ori are inevitable. You can either evolve with them, become a part of their perfection, or be forgotten." She stepped forward, her coat shifting, glitching. Perfection is stagnation. Humanity was never meant to be perfect. Marco's lips curled. "And that's why you'll lose." The battle began. Vh'ori enforcers flooded the studio, their nanite infused, threads unraveling human creations at the atomic level. Selene and her team fought back the only way they knew how, with fashion itself. Hacked fabrics that disrupted Vh'ori scanners, experimental textiles that adapted mid-combat, color grenades that triggered visual overloads in the enemy's hyper-perceptive brains. Selene moved like a ghost, tearing through the enemy ranks, her every step a defiant act of rebellion. And then, Marco struck. With a flick of his wrist, his own Vh'ori-infused attire shifted, transforming into a weaponized exosuit of seamless silk and liquid metal. "You can't win this," he said, launching toward her. Selene met him head-on, weaponized couture clashing in a symphony of destruction. It was a battle of ideals as much as combat. Every strike, every movement was a statement. Conformity versus chaos, stagnation versus evolution, and in the end, chaos won. Selene's final attack shattered Marco's suit, unraveling it in a cascade of impossible colors and asymmetry. He staggered back, his Vh'ori-enhanced frame unable to process the sheer unpredictability of her human artistry. And as he fell, the last human fashion house stood victorious. Selene had bought herself time, but not much. The Vh'ori would not take this defeat lightly. As she stood in the ruined studio, surrounded by the remnants of humanity's last designers, she realized what she had to do next. She could no longer fight in the shadows. If she was going to win this war, she would have to take the fight directly to them. She would have to challenge the High Curator on their own stage. And so, the final blueprint was drawn. A design unlike anything humanity had ever seen. A piece that defied all logic, all rules, all laws of the universe. A design that could break the Vh'ori once and for all. It would be dangerous. It would be reckless. It would be impossible. But that was exactly what made it human. The world stood on the edge of annihilation, and its last hope was woven in fabric. The grand aesthetic convergence, The final stage of the Vh'ori conquest was set to take place on the Celestial Runway, an enormous orbital construct drifting above Earth. It was a place where laws of gravity, light, and physics were rewritten at will, where the fabric of reality was just another material to be shaped by the hands of the aesthetic elite. For centuries, the Vh'ori had used it as their ultimate proving ground, a stage where entire civilizations had been judged and erased. Now, it was humanity's turn. Selene Vega was the only thing standing between Earth and complete aesthetic subjugation, and she was ready. The moment she stepped onto the Celestial Runway, she felt the weight of the Vh'ori's power pressing against her. The walls of the vast chamber rippled like liquid metal, shifting in impossible symmetrical patterns, an oppressive display of their control over form and space. The High Curator awaited at the far end, its form woven from 1,000 strands of cosmic silk, shifting, shimmering, a manifestation of the universal aesthetic laws it enforced. Around it stood the echelon of judges, beings of pure artistic perfection, their expressions unreadable. Beyond them, in the void of space, a holographic projection of Earth loomed large, flickering under the weight of the Vh'ori's decree. If Selene lost this contest, her people would never again be allowed to create, to express, to evolve. The moment had come. The challenge was simple, a single showdown of artistic supremacy. Selene had to present a creation so utterly beyond the Vh'ori's comprehension that it would fracture their control over reality itself. The High Curator stepped forward, its voice a whisper of silk against the void. "Present your final submission." Selene took a breath, steadying herself. Everything she had fought for led to this moment. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she unleashed the design that would shake the universe. At first, it looked like nothing, a void, a blank canvas. But then, it moved. A pulse, a heartbeat of creation. Colors bloomed into existence, chaotic, uncontrolled, burning through the sterile perfection of the Celestial Runway like wildfire. The fabric did not obey symmetry. It shattered it. Its texture was not smooth and predictable, but wild, layered, shifting between eras, between realities, between every fashion movement humanity had ever known and every one that had yet to be born. It was not just clothing. It was history. It was future. It was humanity itself. Selene's models stepped forward, draped in designs that should not exist, silhouettes that defied physics, colors that had never been seen before, patterns that bent the very perception of the Vh'ori's reality. And at the center of it all was Selene herself. She wore a living garment, a piece that adapted in real time, constantly evolving, constantly breaking its own rules. One moment, it was sleek, cyberpunk minimalism. Then it transformed into a chaotic explosion of neon streetwear, then into a silhouette reminiscent of Renaissance opulence, before shifting again into something entirely new. A paradox of existence. A rejection of the static. The Vh'ori shuddered. The echelon of judges trembled, their forms glitching, their symmetry failing. The High Curator took an involuntary step back. For the first time in their existence, they did not know what they were looking at. Selene's creation was not just a design. It was unpredictability given form. It was the antithesis of the Vh'ori way of life. The chamber screamed as the balance shattered. The very walls of the Celestial Runway fractured, unable to process the existence of Selene's creation. Vh'ori enforcers collapsed, their forms unraveling into chaotic strands of color and light. The entire structure trembled, reality itself groaning under the weight of an aesthetic contradiction too great to contain. The High Curator reeled, its form distorting as it struggled to maintain control. This is disorder," it whispered, its voice no longer calm, no longer controlled. "No," Selene corrected, stepping forward, her presence overwhelming. "This is evolution." The High Curator tried to fight back, its own garments shifting, warping. trying to counter the chaos with perfected patterns. But it was too late. The damage had been done. For the first time in their existence, the Vh'ori experienced change, and it was breaking them apart. The Celestial Runway collapsed inward, its once perfect geometry corrupting, twisting into impossible shapes. The echelon of judges disintegrated, their forms unable to withstand the sheer unpredictability of Selene's creation. The High Curator let out a final, shuddering breath. We cannot exist in this, Selene smiled. Then you don't belong here. The collapse of the Celestial Runway sent shockwaves across the universe. The Vh'ori, once unshakable, had been undone by something they had never accounted for: the human capacity for reinvention. Their rule over Earth crumbled overnight. Their forces, once unwavering in their dominance, fractured into chaos. Their once perfect uniforms now tainted with imperfection, their own aesthetic laws turning against them. Across the galaxy, civilizations that had once bowed to the Vh'ori's aesthetic tyranny now rose in rebellion, inspired by humanity's defiance. The universal aesthetic standards were shattered. Selene stood on the ruins of the Celestial Runway victorious. Dante's voice flickered into her ear. We did it. She exhaled, feeling the weight of the universe shift. No, she murmured. We changed it. Months later, the first human-designed collection was exported to the stars. The Vh'ori did not disappear. Some of them adapted, choosing to embrace the chaos that had undone their empire. Others fled, vanishing into the void, unable to exist in a universe that was no longer under their control. But one thing was certain: humanity had won. And for the first time in history, the galaxy was taking fashion tips from Earth. The world awoke to a new era, one where the tyranny of aesthetic perfection had been shattered, replaced by the raw, untamed force of human creativity. The Vh'ori occupation was over, but the scars they left behind remained. Cities that had once thrived with chaotic, eclectic culture had been stripped bare, transformed into sterile monuments of enforced symmetry. The streets of Paris, once a vibrant mosaic of styles and subcultures, stood eerily uniform, every building an identical reflection of the next. New York's skyline, once a jagged, ever-changing testament to human ambition, had been flattened into geometric precision. The world had been silenced, and now it had to find its voice again. Selene Vega stood on the balcony of a reborn Milan, looking over the remnants of the old world as it began to heal. Fashion had saved humanity, but now it had a new purpose, not just to reclaim what was lost, but to create something new. Behind her, the underground designers, the rebels, the artists who had fought alongside her were already at work. Workshops hummed with energy, machines stitching together the first true post-Vh'ori designs, unpredictable, asymmetrical, bursting with colors and textures that had been forbidden just weeks ago. Dante flickered into existence beside her, his holographic form now less structured, more fluid. An aesthetic choice, he claimed, inspired by the very rebellion they had fought. The first independent collections are already spreading. New Paris is holding an underground show tonight. Tokyo's streetwear designers are releasing pieces based on the final battle. The Vh'ori remnants on Earth, those who didn't flee, are trying to understand. Selene exhaled. The war had been won, but what came next mattered even more. The universe had changed, and humanity was now at the center of it. Not all of the Vh'ori had vanished. Some of them had fled, escaping into the void, unable to exist in a universe that no longer obeyed their laws. But others had stayed behind, shaken, forced to face the consequences of their failure. The High Curator had not been destroyed. It had fractured, its once perfect form now tainted, its shimmering, symmetrical fabric now torn, asymmetrical, flawed. The being that had once declared human fashion obsolete now stood at the fringes of a world it no longer understood. Selene found it waiting for her in the ruins of the Celestial Runway, where the battle had been fought and won. The High Curator did not speak. Not at first. Its voice, once calm and absolute, now wavered. We do not know what we are anymore. Selene studied the being, seeing it now for what it was. Not an untouchable force, not a supreme judge of beauty, but simply a race that had never been challenged. They had never known change, never known a world where art could be unpredictable, where creation was an act of rebellion, where beauty was something subjective, untamed. You have a choice, Selene said finally. You can fade away, retreat into the void and cling to the past, to a world that no longer exists. Or, she stepped forward. You can learn. The High Curator shuddered, its form rippling like a fabric caught in the wind. For the first time, we do not know the right path, it admitted. That's the point, Selene said. There isn't one. There never was. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving the remnants of the once mighty Vh'ori Empire to decide whether they would adapt or disappear. The war had changed everything. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't just consuming alien culture, it was creating it. The first human-designed collection for the intergalactic market was already in motion. Designers across Earth were collaborating with other species, introducing them to the very concept of trend cycles, subcultures, movements born out of rebellion and reinvention. Selene stood at the edge of a new frontier. She had spent her life fighting for a vision, not of perfection, not of control, but of freedom in creation. Now she had a new mission. She wasn't just designing for Earth anymore. She was designing for the stars. The Vh'ori had ruled through rigid perfection. But they had been broken by a species that refused to be defined. Humanity had done what no civilization before them had ever accomplished. They had proven that imperfection was power, that art was chaos, that beauty was in the act of creation itself, and the universe would never be the same. Selene smiled as she watched the first human-fashion broadcast go interstellar, spreading across the cosmos, reaching worlds that had never known change. For the first time in history, the galaxy was no longer dictating beauty to Earth. Earth was dictating beauty to the galaxy. The transmission came at midnight. Selene Vega had just finished overseeing the final stitches on the first intergalactic collection, her designs bound for worlds that had never known chaos, never tasted the raw defiance of human fashion. The war had been won. The Vh'ori were broken. The universe was changing. And yet, as she stood on the balcony of the reborn Milan, the city's skyline once again a glorious mess of neon streetwear, avant-garde couture, and industrial minimalism, a cold pulse of something inevitable settled in her gut. Dante flickered into existence beside her. His normally fluid, glitchy hologram had gone still. Frozen. A rare thing. You should see this, he murmured. She turned to the floating screen, her breath catching as the message unfolded before her. Vh'ori transmission. Origin, uncharted system. Encryption level, absolute. The message contained no words, no threats, just an image, a Vh'ori being, but different. Its once perfect form was distorted, its fabrics no longer a seamless weave of mathematical purity, but fractured, chaotic, unpredictable. The being was wearing human design, and then, at the bottom, a simple, chilling phrase, "The revolution has begun." Selene's pulse quickened. She knew what this meant. The Vh'ori had not simply broken, they had split. For eons, the Vh'ori had ruled as a monolithic force of order, dictating aesthetic law across galaxies. But now there was a fracture, a rebellion within their own ranks. Some of them had seen the truth, felt the pull of chaos, and now They were fighting back, against their own kind. Selene exhaled, staring at the message. So, they finally learned, Dante nodded. And now, they want a teacher. Selene had thought the war was over, but wars never truly ended. They just changed shape. This was no longer just about Earth, no longer just about survival. This was about what came next, a civil war among the Vh'ori, a battle not fought with weapons, but with art, culture, rebellion, a war for the soul of an empire. Selene smirked. Pack the fabrics, Dante. We're going to change the universe again. The revolution had begun, and this time, the entire galaxy was watching.